Good morning. This is Professor Charles Jeffries of Rainier Avenue Radio, and today we're going to talk about African Americans in the military. What's really interesting is that African Americans have fought in every war this country has had, from the Revolutionary War to the Civil War to the Desert Storm to the Vietnam War to the present. Okay, right now I think it's somewhere around 15 to 20% of your military is either African American or Latino, maybe up to 25% if you count Latinos in there. Okay, so we fought every war, and it's really interesting to stop and think about that from the Revolutionary War. The interesting about the Revolutionary War, African Americans have fought on both sides of the Revolutionary War. African Americans fought on the side of the British, and also African Americans fought on the side of the Americans. Okay, it's really, you think about, I was reading an article the other day where they're talking about Daughters of American Revolution and another kind of Sons of American Revolution. And I think of that, wonder how many of those folks who claim to be descendants of the American people who fought in the Revolution actually fought in there, and how many of those folks who claim to be Daughters of American Revolution actually sent their slaves to fight in their name. That's something we'll never know. But in terms of fighting on the side of the British, it was a carrot, because what the British said, well, if you escape and fought on our side, we will give you your freedom, and not only give you your freedom, give you some land, either in Jamaica or Nova Scotia. And also, you think about anybody see the movie Bridgerton, that the Bridgerton that came out, where it showed that African nobleman, and more than likely he fought on the side of the British and was able to get a castle of nobility as probably for being an officer in the British Army. Okay, and so first, let's show you the first video.
During the Revolutionary War, an escaped slave joined the Brits and led a squad that terrorized slave owners, freed slaves, and held patriots hostage. Bet you never learned about him in history class, though. What up? I'm Che, and welcome to the Black Joy Club, where we celebrate us. Today, we're celebrating Titus Cornelius, better known as Colonel Ty. This man was the original by any means necessary, with receipts. So picture it, it's 1775, the Revolutionary War has just kicked off, and colonists are talking all this liberty and justice for all, except for black folks. Then this British dude, Lord Dunmore, the governor of Virginia, told all the slaves, hey, if you make it to our side, you'll be free. Now don't get it twisted, the Brits weren't exactly woke. They just wanted to cripple the American economy and win the war. And what better way to do that than to tell a quarter of the population, if you roll with us, you're free. So Dunmore throws together the Ethiopian Regiment, and this was essentially an all-star group of escaped slaves who were down to fight for the British. Enter Titus Cornelius. He was born into slavery in Jersey to some Quakers who were supposed to free him at age 21. But his master was like, yeah, about that. No. So when the war pops off, Titus escapes, he joins Dunmore's regiment, and he starts making a name for himself as a soldier. Now, the Ethiopian regiment didn't last long. Dunmore had to bounce to New York in 1776, but Titus, he wasn't done, okay? He heads back to Jersey, links up with the Black Loyalists, and by 1779, he's running a group called the Black Brigade, an elite guerrilla unit of black and white loyalists operating out of Sandy Hook, New Jersey, in a place called Refugee Town. These dudes specialized in night raids, okay? They were kidnapping patriots, freeing slaves, and jacking supplies. The title Colonel, well, the military wasn't trying to give that out, so his men gave it to him as an honor because they liked him so much. And that boy was a problem. He knew the land, and he had picked up guerrilla tactics from Native Americans, and he had the whole region on edge. This was the colonists' worst nightmare. Picture this. You're a patriot. It's in the middle of the night. You're dreaming about liberty and justice and all that. And then bam, Colonel Ty and his mixed race crew bust in your door. See, he and his men often targeted their former masters. So you're barely awake, and then you realize the person you terrorized and beat is back with his boys, and they're armed to the teeth. Stop. This is a Tarantino movie waiting to be made. If you were lucky, they just beat you down, stole your slaves, took all your stuff, took you hostage, and set your whole place on fire. But sometimes they kill people.
No mercy.
One raid in Shrewsbury, they made off with 80 cattle, 20 horses, and even took some of the town's big shots as hostages and later got paid in gold for them. One raid in Middletown, they were only like 20 deep, but they kidnapped the two Patriot leaders and they spiked the military cannons so that people couldn't call for help. And most of their raids, they didn't lose a single man.
That boy is good.
All right. And so that's one side. Now there's another group of African Americans fought on the American side. Now we're going to hear their story.
Imagine standing on the front lines of the American Revolution, where the very ideals of freedom and equality are being fought for, but a significant portion of the population, even some of the soldiers beside you, remain shackled by slavery. This was the case in 1775 when the shots fired at Lexington and Concord sparked the Revolutionary War. 500,000 Black people were living in the colonies at the time, 90% of whom were enslaved. But as the war raged, did you know that far more Black men fought for the British loyalists than the American patriots? In an America rampant with slavery and racism, many Black soldiers saw a British victory as their best chance for freedom. And the British promised them liberation in exchange for their service. While some promises were fulfilled, what happened next was much more complex.
You leave to go to the unknown when you are absolutely sure that what's behind you, what you're leaving, is worse. So that kind of impassioned service is always going to have an edge.
This is the story of the broken promises and betrayal that characterized experiences of Black soldiers and how it ultimately shaped the fight for equality in the land of the free. I'm Rainier Bot, and this is In the Margins. Black men, both enslaved and free, played a vital role in the Revolutionary War. As news of the battle at Lexington and Concord spread down the East Coast, thousands of soldiers gathered to fight against British forces. Historical records show there were at least 18 Black men, both enslaved and free, engaged in battle that day. This was the informal start of the American Continental Army. In the months that followed, over 14,000 Massachusetts men, including both free and enslaved Black men, enlisted to fight for the Patriots. But by July, George Washington, a Virginia enslaver, took command of the Patriots and excluded Black men from the ranks. His order was rooted in the fear of enslavers losing their valuable property in combat and the potential for an armed rebellion of people who were enslaved.
George Washington, as a Southern plantation owner, this is his worst nightmare. He looks out into his men and he sees brown faces and Black faces. And when he sees the brown and Black faces, he looks at them and he's like, who are these men and who are they going to shoot? So their biggest and their fears is that these men, if allowed to continue, would rampage through the colony.
Meanwhile, the British saw an opportunity. Through Dunmore's proclamation on November 7, 1775, John Murray, the royal governor of Virginia, urged enslaved people to escape their captors and join the Loyalist forces. The British saw this as an opportunity to bolster their ranks and weaken the American colonial system.
But Lord Dunmore was not an abolitionist. He was thinking purely military. This wasn't necessarily done as a moral thing. He was a slave owner himself.
Within 1 month, 300 Black men and women had escaped slavery and enlisted. And that number grew into the tens of thousands in the years that followed. Nervous about this influx of Loyalist manpower, Washington lifted his restriction on free Black men. And soon, enslaved men would also enlist, often coerced by their owners. By the end of the war, some 9,000 Black men were fighting for the Patriots. So how did the Patriots persuade Black men to fight for a colonial system that oppressed them? And how did the Loyalists convince people to risk their lives escaping slavery? The answer lies in three major promises: fairness, freedom, and land. Let's unpack these promises. First, the promise of fairness. Many Black men expected fair and equal treatment while fighting for the Patriots. This was sometimes true, but not always. Black soldiers mostly received the same pay and provisions as their white counterparts. That said, they often served longer terms than white soldiers, weren't promoted to high rankings, and their pension payments delayed or completely denied when the war was over.
There. So we're talking about the the Revolutionary War. Now let's talk about the Civil War. Civil War also, you had a lot of African Americans fighting in the war. Okay, you had a few fighting the Confederate Army. Some slaves came, like Bass Reeves. He came up and fought on the side of the Confederate Army. But then you had majority of blacks fought on the side of the Union Army. I mean, it was made an incentive to a certain extent for them to be free and then go back and fight. Okay, and there's some other pictures of your African Americans. Of course, most of them had white officers, with the exception of this individual here. He graduated from West Point, and he was one of the first officers leading the Buffalo Soldiers, who we're going to talk about next.
Buffalo Soldiers were a real thing, not just a reggae song. Buffalo Soldiers were some of the bravest and most decorated soldiers to serve in the United States military, and yet their accomplishments aren't very well known because of racism. This is the untold truth of the Buffalo Soldiers. During the American Civil War, all black regiments called the United States Colored Troops made up roughly 10% of the Union Army. Those troops were disbanded at the end of the war, and a lot of newly free blacks in other parts of the nation found themselves facing difficult circumstances. In 1866, Congress passed the Army Organization Act, which was mostly just a lot of fluff about pay for soldiers and officers and organizational stuff. But the act also allowed for the creation of 4 new cavalry regiments, 2 of which would consist of black soldiers and white officers, and 8 new companies of infantry, 4 of which would consist of black soldiers and white officers. Many free blacks saw this as a rare opportunity and perhaps their only one to make a decent living. These were considered peacetime regiments, but peacetime isn't really a super accurate word since there was still plenty of conflict happening in the American West, mostly against the indigenous population. The American Civil War freed blacks from slavery, but not from oppression. They weren't equal under the law. They faced ugly, out in the open racism, whether they were in southern states, northern states, or the frontier. A lot of blacks saw military service as a pathway to civil rights, if they could prove themselves in uniform. Surely equal rights and fair treatment would follow. Unfortunately, military service post-Civil War meant fighting for the oppression of another group, Indigenous Americans. According to history, the original purpose of the Buffalo Soldiers was to keep the natives from causing trouble. They were to help with the westward expansion, which meant fighting and pushing back the native people. Though that wasn't their only task, they had other responsibilities too, like catching cattle rustlers and protecting settlers on the frontier. All nice, not very visible jobs, which was important because the white folks living in populated communities might die from shock if they saw black men dressed in army uniforms carrying weapons. Buffalo Soldiers is a pretty odd name, and no one is really sure exactly why it was given to black soldiers on the frontier. According to history, the 2 all-black cavalry units were officially the 9th and 10th Cavalry Regiments, and it was the Native Americans that the men were supposed to be controlling who gave them the nickname Buffalo Soldiers. But their reasons for choosing that particular moniker are mostly a mystery. One theory suggests that the natives thought the soldiers' thick, curly hair resembled the fur of a buffalo, but that frankly seems like an idea someone might have pulled out of their own backside. The more popular and probably correct theory is that the Buffalo Soldiers fought courageously and fiercely, so the Plains people named them after the buffalo, an animal they had a deep respect and reverence for. Origins aside, it's clear that the soldiers themselves saw the nickname as one of respect, and even incorporated the image of a buffalo into their coat of arms.
So there you go, Buffalo Soldiers. And also the Buffalo Soldiers, what a lot of people don't realize is Buffalo Soldiers also fought in the Spanish-American War. Okay, and what's this, Rough Riders? Theodore Roosevelt Rough Riders? Well, the Buffalo Soldiers helped win that so-called battle with San Juan Hill and set things up for the Rough Riders to come in there and take over.
The Buffalo Soldiers advanced under heavy Spanish fire. Their disciplined maneuvers and effective use of cover allowed them to outflank the enemy and press forward. showcasing their superior combat skills. Their performance in this initial engagement was instrumental, not only in achieving a strategic victory, but also in earning the respect of their fellow soldiers and commanders. American generals devised a strategy that centered around taking control of the important city of Santiago de Cuba, the island's second largest city. But they would first have to take control of two fortified hilltop positions that made up the city's outer defenses. These key engagements would become celebrated as the Battle of Kettle Hill and the Battle of San Juan Hill. As the Spanish infantry entrenched itself on the peaks of the two hills, some 8,000 Americans prepared for an epic battle. Included in the 13 regiments were almost 1,300 black soldiers from the 9th and 10th Cavalry. On July 1, 1898, the Battle of Kettle Hill became a defining moment in the Spanish-American War. The Buffalo Soldiers of the 9th and 10th Cavalry regiments found themselves fighting alongside Theodore Roosevelt's Rough Riders in a fierce and intense combat. Under a blistering sun and relentless Spanish gunfire, the Buffalo Soldiers displayed remarkable cohesion and determination. As they advanced up the steep slopes, their disciplined formations and tactical expertise were evident. They provided crucial support and covering fire, enabling the Rough Riders to press forward. The intense combat tested the mettle of every soldier on the field. The Buffalo Soldiers' unwavering resolve and bravery stood out as they pushed through enemy lines, their actions pivotal in breaking the Spanish defenses. Despite the chaos and carnage, the Buffalo Soldiers' critical role in the battle did not go unnoticed by those who fought alongside them. Their bravery and tactical acumen were key to the victory.
Think about, once again, you hear about Theodore Roosevelt and his Rough Riders, but you don't hear about the Buffalo Soldiers. If any of you seen the movie Posse, Mario Van Peebles, I think he might have produced, but he was one of the main characters in there. And it opened up, and that was that battle scene in the opening part of the movie Posse was representative of the Spanish-American War. Okay, now let's talk about World War I. World War I, really interesting about World War I. There are over 300,000 blacks who fought in World War I, and you'll hear about them. And not only that, they fought under the French army because the American army legally is segregated. So you had folks going from the United States, New York, and Chicago and places to fight in World War I, and they fought under the French command. You want your name?
In 1917, the United States entered World War I, but not everyone who volunteered was welcomed equally. The 369th Infantry Regiment, a unit of black and Puerto Rican soldiers from Harlem, was assigned to the army. But the U.S. Army didn't want them on the front lines. They were handed over to the French, not out of strategy, but segregation. The French saw warriors. They gave them weapons, helmets, and respect. And the Harlem Hellfighters earned every inch of that name. They spent 191 days in frontline combat, longer than any other American unit. In that time, they never gave up an inch of ground. Not a single man was captured. They fought in brutal trench conditions during the Meuse-Argonne offensive, endured gas attacks, constant shelling, hand-to-hand combat, and they won. Private Henry Johnson became a legend. Wounded 21 times, he fought off a German raiding party with just a knife and his bare hands, saving his fellow soldier. France gave him the Croix de Guerre, the U.S. No Medal, no recognition. These men were heroes in Europe and invisible at home. When they returned to New York, they marched through Harlem to roaring crowds, but official America stayed silent. No parades from the government, no praise from the president. It took nearly a century for some of these men to get their due. Henry Johnson was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor in 2015. They were called Hellfighters, not just for how they fought, but for what they fought against: racism, injustice, silence. Drop a comment if their names should be in every history book. Subscribe to uncover the truth behind the legends America tried to forget.
Think about war. I had to fight on the side of the French okay, and became some of the best soldiers during that war. That's even more interesting. And the French saw them for what they really were. On the other hand, at the end of the war, in World War I, a lot of those American soldiers did not want to come back to America. They wanted to live in France. Of course, that was the time Billie Holiday and James Baldwin, a lot of African Americans were living in France. They talked about how much freer they felt in France than they did in the United States. Now let's go to World War II. World War II, these are all fighters. See that main largest picture there? In that picture there, that's my father. He was a MP during World War II. Okay. And also, we talked about Tuskegee Airmen in one of our episodes. Today, I want to talk about another group of World War II tank fighters fought in the tank division, and they are actually called the Black Panthers.
During World War II, segregation in the U.S. military led to the creation of all-black units. But while some rose to fame for their combat exploits, others remained virtually unknown. When Allied forces landed at Normandy on June 6, 1944, one of the group's tasks was setting the metal cabled barrage balloons was the 320th Barrage Balloon Battalion. Assigned to the smaller balloons that rose above the beachhead, the 320th was the first balloon unit to land on D-Day and the first all-black unit to set foot in France. 6 months later, during the Battle of the Bulge, the all-black 761st Tank Battalion helped turn the German offensive into one of the greatest American victories in history. Known as the Black Panthers, they fought for 2 continuous days against German panzer and infantry units at Tillet, Belgium. Later, helped defeat the Nazi forces encircling American troops at Bastogne. On the opposite side of the world, black units also fought in the Pacific Theater of Operations. The first African Americans to enlist in the Marine Corps were the Montford Point Marines, so named after their segregated training facility near Camp Lejeune. Although often assigned to supply jobs overseas, elements of the Montford Point Marines engaged Japanese forces in Saipan, Guam, and Palau. In the Atlantic, 2 U.S. Navy ships, destroyer escort USS Mason DE-529 and subchaser USS PC-1264 were crewed by African American sailors. In October of 1944, the Mason earned distinction while escorting a massive convoy to Europe. Suddenly caught in a devastating storm, she battled through 50-foot seas and winds gusting up to 70 knots to single-handedly lead 20 ships to the safety of England. Although her operations were tamer in comparison, PC-1264 also earned distinction. On May 2, 1945, Ensign Samuel L. Gravely Jr. reported on board as the ship's first African American officer. Gravely would later go on to become the first African American to attain the rank of admiral. While their combat records are often not well known to the general public, our military continues to honor the legacy of these units.
Think about that. When you hear about tank divisions on television and movies, okay, the same dynamics, all these folks fought in the war. And that's why I have nothing but respect for veterans. I don't give a what nationality they are. Going there, fighting, risking their lives out there, and they come back home and don't get treated the same way. I mean, officers get promoted, politicians get reelected, but the grunt soldier gets screwed almost every war. And okay, next war we're talking about is the Korean War. These 2 individuals here are very important individuals, Chappie James and Frank Peterson. Chappie James was also one of the Tuskegee Airmen, but he also fought as a pilot during the Korean War, and he's also head of the pilots. He also became a first 4-star general. Okay, it's Chappie James. And then next to Chappie James is Frank Peterson. He was a fighter pilot during the Korean War and the Vietnam War. Okay, and he also was the first Black Marine general. Okay, and then let's move forward to the Vietnam War. That was really an interesting war in the extent that was now your armies are integrated, and Daniel Moynihan came out with his Moynihan report and suggested that black males should go to Vietnam and fight on the front lines. And so therefore, if you were black and got drafted for Vietnam, you're going straight to the front lines. And they're all back to World War II. There are 1.2 million African Americans who fought during World War II. Okay, back to Vietnam, though. I mean, they're sending brothers right to the front line, but also it's kind of a conflict because you're out here fighting against people you don't know, as Muhammad Ali once said, to support a group of people who are trying to keep you down. The next video.
Before dawn, November 8, 1944, northeast France, 50 miles from the German border. Thunderous explosions from more than 500 heavy artillery guns shake the ground as George Patton's Third Army resumes its...
All right. Well, we're running out of time. Okay, so I'm going to continue this at another time. However, now you have a slice of some information that you can share with other folks. Okay, like in some, we fought in every war. Every war the United States had that we fought in. And you look at individuals like Donald Trump, whose father was an immigrant. He's a son of an immigrant. He never fought in the war. A lot of these folks coming into the country never fought in the war, and now they're trying to bash us as a people. And so you think about these are individuals who participated in the freeing and every war that we've had. Okay, and so it's been a great day talking about you today, and we'll see you on August 5th.